let me ask you this, because I think
Nothing.
this is something that they have done correctly. Is finally they did it. And we're 5 years in waiting for this. Is how did Vince finally decide? Okay, we're going to take Roman Reigns and we're going to make him a heel. We're going to put him with Paul Heyman, and like something that should have been done, years
Right.
ago when the fans were begging them to, and now they're finally doing it when there's no fans. Funny, like they did it, but I think that's been
much now.
Yeah, but I think that's been a fantastic pairing because Roman just being himself. Because it was funny too when we used to talk about like years ago on this show how he was getting booed, he was acting cool. It's like I used to point out like when this guy does his ring entrance, he's supposed to be a babyface, but he's just walking like so, taking so much time, walking so slow that like he's just like like screams arrogance and like I'm better than you and stuff. And he's doing that character right now. And I'm like, how could they not have seen that this is what this guy is, just laid back and cool and acting like the dad in the room, and he's above the rest of the roster and everything. I mean, how do you guys? First of all, how did Vince come up with that idea, or how was he convinced to do it? Do you know who gave that idea, Billy?
Yeah, I know all about this one, so this is easy to talk about because it's already happened. First of all, I sat at WrestleMania. I went to WrestleMania 33 with my kid. And the next night on Raw, I've been to a lot of wrestling. I've been watching since 1990, and I've been going to, and now I think I've done like 14 Manias in a row.
Did you go watch WCW when we come to Manchester?
I didn't watch it in Manchester. I watched it in London.
Oh, interesting. Cool.
I think you did a Nitro in London
at the O2 Arena. Yeah.
In 2000, yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've never seen it as so much like actual hatred as there was towards Roman the night after he beat The Undertaker. I was convinced that he had turned when he said that was my yard now. And then I watched the TV the next week and he's in a feud with Braun Strowman, and Braun Strowman's beating the shit out of him and injuring him, and people are cheering it like as loudly as they can, and he's still being booked as a babyface. I think there's been moments and times and characters to going against the Yes Movement, going against Cena, going against Undertaker. There's been so many people where you could have turned him and got it done in the ring, and they've been forced into the corner of doing it at this moment, which wasn't necessarily their choice. Roman has wanted to have this pairing with Paul for a long time himself, and everything lined up for them to do it because they needed Paul to come back, because Paul was sitting on the side and he's far more affordable to AEW than Brock Lesnar is. So this may take some time to explain, but I'm going to explain it for your guys listeners. Brock Lesnar's contracts have always been some information that we've been able to get hold of. He started with a 1-year contract for $5 million, and then he renewed for 2 years for $3 million a year, and then he had 3 years at $3 million a year as well. So after that one, in I believe it was 2018, when he beat Roman, he then began the year-to-year contract, and he had something which Meltzer recently called a merchandise contract. There's no such thing. It's called an image rights contract. It exists in sports, but I don't think Dave Meltzer watches any other sport in the world. I think he just watches wrestling, and he referred to this as a merchandise contract. Brock Lesnar signed an image rights contract, which means that every year WWE gave him $500,000 up front for a whole year before he wrestled anybody, just to stick his face on shit and just to say that they had Brock Lesnar. So before he did anything, he had $500,000. He then got $100,000 to come to Raw, and he then got $500,000 to do a pay-per-view, and he got $1 million to go to Saudi. So everything Brock was doing post 2018 was appearance by appearance by appearance at a rate agreed in the image rights contract that he had. Paul Heyman had contracts for 1 year that ran alongside it. Paul was paid $750,000, which is more than like most of the talents get on his downside, just to come and stand next to Brock Lesnar. Anyway, at one point, Paul had 2 contracts running, a talent and a creative contract. So he was working both. He was earning nearly double that when he was working on the creative team, and he was working alongside Brock. Both contracts ran out. So Paul Heyman and Brock have been sitting on the side. This big story about Brock's merchandise being pulled off doesn't mean anything, because Brock hasn't had a contract since WrestleMania, because that's when he kept signing for a year each time. But Paul, his creative contract still existed, whereas his talent contract also ran out at the same time as Brock at WrestleMania. So when his creative contract ran out, they didn't renew it, and he's been sitting there, and AEW could have picked him up. So when Roman Reigns said he wanted to come back and he wanted to work with Paul, and they're running through ideas, they were already looking for a reason to pay Paul anyway because they don't want him showing up on AEW. Not that he would, but he's much more likely and a much better fit for AEW than Brock Lesnar is because AEW ain't going to be paying that money. But they could have paid for Paul. So they were desperate to get Paul back, and they were desperate to get Roman back, and the two guys wanted to be together, and that's how you have it. That's what happened.
I'll tell you what. I think Roman, like you said, he doesn't need people to talk for him in a vignette. But you know, on Raw, they have that spot on the show that very few people can fill the shoes. You got to have that 10-minute promo. And Roman talking for 10 minutes, I'm not a fan of that. Paul Heyman talking for 8 and Roman talking for 2, I think that works.
Yeah.
You know,